Hi everyone. It's great to see so many of you here. It's freezing outside, so thanks to you all for making it tonight. My name is Abel Korver. I'm the current president of Harvard College Peace Action, and I'm a senior at Harvard College here. We're a group of students here at Harvard trying to raise awareness about the dangers of war and nuclear war in particular. I want to alert all students here in the area that we have a sign-up sheet here at the front table. So if you want to stay up to date with events that we're organizing, or if you want to get involved and help us organize future events, I recommend that you sign up there, and you can talk to me after the event if you have any questions about our activities. So we're very, very excited tonight to have Professor Michael Klare with us. He's the Fife College Professor of Peace and World Security Studies, and he'll be speaking to us tonight about the new Cold War, geopolitical competition between the US, China, and Russia. I think that with the Obama government investing $1 trillion over the next 30 years in upgrading our nuclear arsenal, and military budgets of the United States and other countries around the world sky high despite record levels of poverty and social suffering, I think this talk could really not come at a better time. A quick note about the format of tonight's event. Duncan McFarland from United for Justice with Peace will give a quick update on their activities. And then we'll have Joseph Gerson from the American Friends Service Committee introduce Professor Klare. And then after Professor Klare's talk, we'll have a 15-minute question and answer period. So we'd very much like to thank United for Justice with Peace for organizing this event with us, as well as the American Friends Service Committee and Massachusetts Peace Action. I think I recognize a lot of you here that are from those organizations. So thank you very much to all those organizations, and thank you, Joseph, and thank you, Duncan, and of course, especially thank you, Professor Klare, for being here tonight with us. I'm very, very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Abel. My name's Duncan. I'm from United for Justice with Peace, UJP, one of the sponsors of tonight's program. UJP is a Boston area peace and justice coalition. Our website's a good source of information about local peace movement programs and activities. So you can see with the various websites up here, justicewithpeace.org. So we encourage you to go there, and actually you can participate and contribute. And you can learn more about UJP. A New Cold War is the first in a series of programs that UJP has initiated to direct attention beyond the daily Middle East headlines, which are very important, of course, to other areas of concern around the world in terms of war and peace. For example, the things happening in Eastern Europe, the Western Pacific, the military buildup in Africa by the U.S. and France, and the situation in Latin America and Venezuela, and so forth. So our next program, you can look on the website. I would just direct you to, there will be a national conference on the U.S.-Saudi alliance March 5th and 6th in Washington. And we'll probably hear more about that. Stephen Cohen and the Nation referred to the U.S.-NATO buildup in East Europe as the biggest military buildup on Russia's border since World War II. This is a very dangerous situation, as are the rising tensions in the South China Sea and the Pacific. And now Joe Gerson of AFSC will introduce tonight's speaker.
So I know you didn't come to hear one introduction after another, but anyhow, simply to say that it's very much my real pleasure to be introducing Michael, and to say that as the word of the event got out, we had requests from Brooklyn, we had requests from Manila, we had requests from Berlin for videotape or live streaming, which we weren't able to do. But to say, I think that speaks to the importance both of the moment, of the subject, and of Michael's very fine and very long contributions. When you get to be our age, you don't want to talk about how long you've been working together, but simply to say that Michael spoke at the first conference I organized actually here at Harvard in 1976, which was I think it was called Arms, Oil, and the Multinationals in the U.S. Policy in the Middle East. Michael has become really one of the more renowned analysts of U.S. foreign and military policy. He's, among other things, the contributing military editor to The Nation. Prolific writer. I think he's written 14 books. It's rather easy to find his articles everywhere, from The Nation to Tom's Dispatch, and he's just one of these people who has really tried to help us, in a way, understand what's happening in the world beyond us. As was mentioned before, if I can find my paper here, don't find the paper. I simply say that Michael is the Five-College Professor of Peace and World Security Studies for the Five-College region, which means he has an appointment from the 5 colleges in the Pioneer Valley. Well, let's see what we can do. We could do Amherst, UMass, Mount Holyoke, Hampshire College, where he's rooted, and Smith. Yes, okay. So we got to 5. But just to say that in addition to his work in the wider public sphere, Michael is a really dedicated teacher, has worked with students and really nurtured them for a very long time. I think it's worth saying as he looks at the kind of changes that we need. When we invited Michael to come and speak, he said, well, I'll come on one condition, that we have it at college so we can have young people, because the reality is that we have to be working with the next generation. I'm going to say it's a cliche, but at the same time it's very real. The next generation carries the future. You need to know the world we live in, and you will make the movements as we older people move on. So with all that said, my real pleasure to introduce Michael Klare.
So hello everybody, and this is going to be, I hope, more of a conversation than just me speaking. So encourage any of you who are way back there who want to come move down. That would be welcome. But we'll get there. I'm delighted to be here, to see so many friends, old friends, new friends, and want to thank Abel for having us here, and Duncan, and Duncan, and for sponsoring us, and Joe as well, and for all of you who came. So I think we're in a very strange and difficult time, and I'm not sure that I know exactly what's going on. I don't think anybody can, but I think we are in a moment of transition. We're moving into a new world. It is dangerous. The world's always dangerous, but it's dangerous in new ways. That's what I want to talk about tonight. And I'll talk for a while, but I really want to have it be a conversation, because I don't know all the answers, and I want to hear from you folks as well, what you have to say to this. So I will proceed. I'll try to stick to about 30 minutes, no more, so that there's ample, more than 15 minutes for your participation in this discussion. So my topic tonight is a new Cold War, ? Geopolitical competition between the U.S., China, and Russia. Now, you notice that the first part of this, a new Cold War, has a question mark after it. Originally, I was asked to speak on the topic, the new Cold War. And I thought about that, and I reflected on it, and I have some doubts about that categorization. We can discuss that. So I decided to add a question mark. And then I thought about it some more, and I decided that the question mark invites something else, and so I added geopolitical competition between the U.S., China, and Russia. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. So before I go any further, let me remove any aura of suspense. I do not think we are now in or about to enter soon a new Cold War akin to the Cold War of the 1950s through the 1960s. I do think we're headed into a new era of great power geopolitical competition akin to that from the years leading up to World War I, the Great War, whose 100th anniversary we're commemorating now. Of course, we tend to forget about World War I because World War II was so much worse. But a lot of people are thinking more about World War I now that it's the 100th anniversary, and recalling that that war at its time was utterly catastrophic. Tens of millions of people perished. Cities were destroyed. They didn't have nuclear weapons then, but they had weapons of near mass destruction. And empires fell, and civilians were devastated. Young men from all the countries, whole generation were wiped out. So it's worth thinking about World War I. These two paradigms, the pre-World War I era and the Cold War era, have their differences, and I will explain. But I want to emphasize that they're equally dangerous each in their own way. So that even if we don't face, and as I'll argue, the same dangers as in the Cold War period, it doesn't mean we're out of the woods, that we're free of danger. The period before World War I was equally dangerous, and that's what I will try to talk about tonight. So here's my presentation. Make four topics I'm going to cover. Why I don't think we're seeing a new Cold War, that is to say, akin to the one of the 50s and 60s. Why I do think we're in a new era of geopolitical competition. Why I think this new era of geopolitical competition is exceedingly dangerous. And offer some thoughts about how to address this new era that we're in. Okay, why do I not think we're in a replica of the original Cold War? Well, first of all, I remember the Cold War. Some of you in this room do as well. I was a schoolboy in New York City, in the Bronx, in elementary school, and then in high school in Manhattan. And we all had to go through regular drills of hiding under our desk. And there were drills when we all had to go into the basement of our building because of the possibility of a nuclear attack. That was the law. We were required to do that. And at the same time, there would be pictures in Life magazine. We all knew that ground zero was Times Square. And I was in high school and then in Columbia, about 50, 60 blocks from Times Square. We all knew that we would be annihilated. And everybody we knew would be annihilated. Going under our desk wasn't going to kill us. It wasn't going to save us, I should say. So the Cold War was vivid in my experience. I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was a student at Columbia when we really thought nuclear weapons were going to strike and we would be wiped out. So I lived through my childhood, as many of you here may remember, thinking that nuclear war was very real and was going to happen, and we would all perish. And that was the time also when the U.S. and the Soviet Union faced each other across the Iron Curtain in Europe, and there were other boundaries in the Middle East and Asia with forces lined up on either side, ready to go at a moment's notice into full-scale war, which we knew would escalate into a nuclear attack very quickly, and that the level of slaughter would be immense. I had an opportunity in 1982 as a reporter for Mother Jones magazine to participate in a military exercise on the East German, West German border, and saw U.S. preparations for a full-scale war with the Warsaw Pact. And we saw where the tactical nuclear weapons were stored 50 miles from the border, and And the guys, the soldiers said, why are we wasting our time with this when we knew that within hours of the beginning of the war it would become nuclear. Besides that, in that period, there were virtually no contact across the borders between ordinary people. There was no trade, no student exchanges, nothing but mutual suspicion and hostility. That was what the world was like. This is not the situation we face today. Really, it's not. Although the US, China, and Russia have significant differences and are supporting opposite sides in a number of local conflicts, we don't have forces lined up at this time, thank gods, ready at a moment's notice to engage in war with a very high likelihood of nuclear escalation. I'm not saying that that couldn't happen in the future, but I don't feel that that's imminent. I don't think it's the same sort of thing. Moreover, there's considerable trade and contact between the U.S., Russia, and China. A lot of students travel back and forth and take classes there. There are corporate joint ventures and a variety of other cooperative endeavors. The Cold War period was also a period of, there was a kind of stability to it. It was a freaky stability. Mutual assured destruction was not the sort of way you want to keep things stable. But there was a degree of stability because both sides understood that any especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, that any wildly provocative behavior would instantly trigger a explosive escalatory event that could lead very quickly to a nuclear exchange. So it was kind of static. Each side was aware of the risks of miscalculation. But I don't think that's the situation we're in today, and I don't think that's the world we're likely to face in the future. Rather, I think we're in a different kind of world. It's a world in which there are not two but three poles of contending strength: the U.S., China, and Russia, as well as an assortment of lesser powers also vying for regional influence. India, Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, among others, all jostling for advantage, for geopolitical advantage in the world. And it's a very fluid world. It's not the static world of the Cold War period. It's a very different kind of structure, architecture of world relations. The United States remains the most powerful of these poles, of these centers of contending influence and competition, but not so much more powerful that it can intimidate any of the others or any combination of the others. The United States is also exhausted by two wars in the Middle East, and there's very little enthusiasm among the public, despite what you hear from candidates, for engaging in another major war anywhere in the world. So there's a degree of reticence and a desire not to get excessively involved in more foreign military adventures. Nonetheless, it's the only power still that is able to project power everywhere in the world, on every continent. No other country is in a capacity to do that. But we have two other powers, Russia and China, that seek to extend their influence way beyond their borders into other regions of the world. Russia in the Middle East, especially, we see that now. China in Central Asia and Southeast Asia and other areas. And whereas the United States is sort of reeling from its misadventures in the Middle East, Russia and China are feeling more contentious. Russia, a former superpower, a former empire, feels that it has been abused by the post-Cold War era and seeks to reassert what it sees as its historic right to play a role way beyond its borders as a great power, to extend its influence beyond its borders, and is testing the United States and other powers in see how far it could go in that direction. China was once a great empire and a great power. It was humiliated and humbled by the colonial powers in the 18th and 19th centuries. Now China feels it's time to restore itself to a great power with supreme influence in its region and to extend its influence beyond. Both of these countries feel that the United States has been weakened by its adventures overseas, and that it's a good time for them to test to see how much further they can extend their influence. And there are other powers not quite as ambitious, but powers that seek greater influence in their own region. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, among others, India now, also seeking to extend their influence beyond their territories. So this is the world we live in today. It's a very fluid world. It's a very contested world. All these countries are vying for advantage, for influence, for control over resources, over significant geographic features in the areas surrounding them, and in many overlapping areas of contention: Central Asia, the Middle East, the Pacific area. All these areas have multiple powers contending for influence. And all of these poles of power are pursuing their own interests independently, sometimes in alignment with others, sometimes not. Sometimes China and Russia cooperate against the United States. In Central Asia, they are united in trying to keep the United States out of the area, but they themselves are competing for influence in that area. So at this stage, in this fluid world environment that we're in, I don't see any likelihood that any of these countries that I've named will take deliberate action that would lead to a head-on clash with any of the others. That they're not going to, I don't see them, they're going to instigate a war with any other major player. However, and this is the scary part, they all seek to gain influence and advantage in contested borderlands between them, in the contested areas in the world. They're seeking advantage by intervening in these contested zones: Syria, Ukraine, Yemen, Libya, Afghanistan, where two or more of these actors all contending for influence and power. They're all intervening, providing weapons, sending advisors, in some cases sending covert forces. They are all using these countries as these contested zones as chessboards to try to extend their influence and power. Syria being the most obvious example, where you have Turkey seeking advantage, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, the United States, among others, all seeking to affect the outcome and extend their influence. Now, before I go any further about this, I want to say that I find this incredibly cruel and immoral, because one consequence of this is that multiple powers pouring in weapons and advisors and the like ensures that the level of slaughter in these small wars is incredibly great. What's happening in Syria is one of the great crimes of any time in history. Maybe not on the scale of World War I or World War II, but close to that in magnitude. It is a crime of incredible magnitude, and it's because all of these outside powers are using it as a chessboard to move pawns around. And this is what we're going to see more and more of, I believe. That's bad enough. But also, all of these powers are testing each other, how far they can get, how far can they go before they provoke some kind of extreme action. They're all seeking to demonstrate their virility, their vigor, and to test the resolve and steadfastness of their rivals. And these words, virility, steadfastness, resolve, are psychological words, and I chose them, even gendered words. And I think this is an accurate reflection of what we're seeing. It's a very, if you'll forgive me saying, a masculine kind of a game, akin to bullies on a school playground, seeing who's tougher by taunting and pushing and shoving and seeing if they'll get a reaction. That's what we're seeing in the world today. This is very much the backdrop to our election now, because what the Republicans are saying is we're being pushed around. That's their common theme, and that we have to push back. It's time to push back. So that's the kind of world we are. And the way this is being played out is in military action short of war, military exercises, feints, gunboat diplomacy. We don't hear about it a lot, but it's going on all the time. It's speeding up, and it's exceedingly dangerous. What do I mean by this? Russia, for example, is reported to be sending its nuclear-capable bombers. I use nuclear-capable, meaning they can carry nuclear weapons. You don't know if they have nuclear weapons, but they're sending their nuclear weapons into NATO airspace on a regular basis, forcing NATO forces to scramble their jets to chase them out. This is happening almost daily. They've also sent submarines into the territory of NATO countries and Sweden, forcing them to respond in a similar way. And I don't have to talk about Russian involvement in Ukraine. The United States, as for its part, is expanding, and Duncan spoke about this earlier, is building up its military capabilities in Eastern Europe, including the territory of the former Soviet Union, is talking about more military exercises in Eastern Europe on the borders of Russia, planning more exercises in year ahead. The budget for Eastern Europe activities by the U.S. military is going to increase next year fourfold, from $800 million to $3.5 billion. I don't know if you're aware, on Monday, Russia announced it's going to hold what they call SNAP military exercises in southern and western Russia, mobilizing its forces, all of its forces, for full-scale war preparation and presumably for exercises. There's some speculation that this is a prelude to greater Russian involvement in Ukraine. Others say it's a prelude to a tougher stance towards Turkey. Turkey shot down a Russian airplane. That's another example I was going to mention. So we're on the verge of this. Looking at the Pacific, China has declared an air defense identification zone, it's called, over contested islands in the East China Sea, saying that they have control over space, claimed also by Japan. And Japan has sent its forces into this, its planes into that airspace, and the United States sent a nuclear-capable B-52 bombers regularly into this Chinese airspace, just to show we still have the muscle to threaten you. China is building up its claimed islands in the South China Sea, militarizing them, in violation of claims by the other countries in the region that's not their territory. The U.S. is sending missile-armed destroyers, I don't know if they're nuclear-armed or not, within a few miles of these islands. Just a week ago, this happened again. This is exceedingly dangerous kinds of behavior. And there's a lot more other examples. Turkey shot down a plane, a Russian plane. It looks like Russia is now, the next time that happens, and there have been other near incidents on the Syrian-Turkish border. It looks like Russia is preparing for more military response. North Korea fired an intercontinental missile. They claimed it was to put a satellite in space. These are all the kinds of testing that I'm talking about. These are not acts of war per se. They're all what you might call opening gambits in a global chessboard with all these players contending for influence and position on the global chessboard. And the tempo, as I say, and the frequency of these events appears to be increasing. Now, this has me very worried, and it should have all of us worried. First of all, because of the obvious risk of miscalculation and unintended consequences. Think how easy it would be for a panicky 20-something-year-old Chinese airman, these are old men, airmen, to fire on a B-52 bomber in Chinese airspace in their air defense zone. We send B-52 bombers into Chinese airspace, and they send up their planes, and a 20-something pilot in a fighter plane is told to intercept that and thinks that the U.S. plane is threatening and to fire on it and shoot it down. We're just a hairbreadth away from something like that happening. Or if a panicky French or American or British pilot sees a Russian bomber entering, they come right up to the coast of the UK, right into their offshore, these nuclear-capable bombers. A panicky 20-year-old has the same reaction. We're a hairbreadth away from that. And these are happening every day. How many near misses is it going to take before something goes too far and provokes a major incident? Now, if that were to happen tomorrow, I have pretty reasonable confidence that President Obama will get on the phone and talk to President Putin or President Xi Jinping, and they'll work it out. I really do, rather than start World War III. That's why I have some confidence. But how confident can we be that this will be the case in 5 or 10 years from now? That I'm not so sure. Especially if these incidents keep multiplying and the political environment worsens. Now, I know there are a lot of reasons to be concerned about the coming presidential election. I don't have to tell you that, right? But this is what worries me the most. What if it's a President Trump or a President Cruz or Rubio, or even for that matter, Hillary Clinton? We could talk about this. Who's president in 4 or 5 years, and a Chinese fighter pilot in panic shoots down or fires a missile at a B-52 bomber in Chinese-claimed airspace. That's what worries me after a period of these kinds of incidents. My fear is that they're going to feel obliged. This is what the Republicans say every single day if you listen to their language, that President Obama hasn't been tough enough, he hasn't been manly enough. You know, he hasn't enough spine. We have to stand up to the bastards and respond in kind and then some, and show him who's boss. This is the essence of Trump's argument. So what are they going to do when they're in this position? That's what worries me. Now, we've seen a period like this once before. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, when you also had 4 or 5 great powers contending for power and influence all over the world, in Africa, in the Middle East, in the Pacific, in the Balkans, all over Europe, all jostling for advantage, geopolitical strategic advantage, shifting alliances, and where you had smaller powers getting, trying to play these against each other, seek advantage of their own. Serbia, Italy, the Ottoman Empire. These powers, like today, the powers were all intervened in these local conflicts, especially in the Balkans. The British were involved, the Germans were involved, the Austrians were involved, the Russians were involved, fighting over bits of territory. These encounters were not by themselves decisive, but they created a aura of hostility and suspicion and fear that led to the point where just one incident was sufficient to lead to a train of events that led to war. The one that happened was Sarajevo in 1914. That was 102 years ago. I don't think we're in 1914 today, but I do think we're in 1904. And if you look at the history of that period, you will see that there were a series of incidents like we're seeing today, of exactly this kind. Small incidents, encounters that led each one, made the powers more and more fearful and suspicious of the next. So that's why I think we're in a new era of geopolitical competition and rivalry rather than a new Cold War. And I'm going to be very curious to see what your response to that is. But before I finish, I feel I should say a few words about, how do we respond to this world? This is the world we live in. And it's the world we're going to be living in. And I don't see any exit from this world of multiple contending powers, all intervening in small local wars and testing each other. With the risk that one could escalate into something worse. So what do we do? It seems to me that one thing we should try very hard is to combat the inclination to engage in muscle flexing and try to find all the ways to stop everything that has this risk of where some panicky 20-year-old is going to pull a trigger and start a war. So no B-52s in Chinese airspace, no American missile destroyers in Chinese claimed territories, for example, no positioning of American forces on Russian territory, none of that kind of provocative behavior that's so risky and provocative. Now, that's not going to stop Russia and China from engaging in such behavior. So we have to find strategies to persuade that without engaging in tit-for-tat behavior. What do? So we have to find economic means and political means and diplomatic means to work with those countries, even while we decry what they're doing, and we should. What Russia is doing is despicable, I believe, and we should let that be known, but work with them to find ways to discourage them from engaging in provocative behavior. And that's going to involve some kind of quid pro quo on things, and that's going to be hard. And I'm not saying I know the answer to this, but that's the direction we have to move in, it seems to me. I think there should be trilateral summits. We had summits during the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. We need U.S., Russian, Chinese summits to look at these conflict areas and to see how in all of our interests they can be de-escalated and resolved. And what has to be done, what kind of quid pro quos on all sides are there that would bring down the tensions and eliminate the risk of unintended escalation. That's what we have to worry about, unintended escalation. At the same time, I think that we have to think strategically about how to avoid the kinds of behavior that will, because the United States is the most powerful of these countries, and the one that the others are testing themselves against, we have to be mindful of not doing things that's going to incline other powers to align together against us. And as an example I will give briefly is the pivot to the so-called pivot to the Pacific that the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton in particular has supported. That they now call it rebalancing to the Pacific, less threatening. They claim this has nothing to do with China. It has everything to do with China. It is intended to constrain the rise of China. Building new bases in Australia, now going back to building bases in the Philippines after we were thrown out of the Philippines, providing arms and aligning with Vietnam against China, building ties with Burma and Mongolia, all in an effort to, and Indonesia, to constrain China's rise. Not only is this turning the entire Chinese population against the United States, but also pushing China to move closer to Russia. And they are moving closer in strategic terms. China buying more Russian weapons, buying more energy from Russia. This is the worst thing you would want to do, is to create anti-American alliances. It's a madness. So avoid behavior that's going to unite other poles, other powers against the United States in a military fashion. There's more to say about this, and we have to think creatively. Think back. Imagine this is 1904, and we know what happened between 1904 and 1914. All the mistakes. There were turning points in that road that could have been avoided. That's the way we have to think strategically today. What could be done to prevent that kind of escalation of events that led to World War I? That's the way we have to think today. How to reduce this geopolitical competition, the muscle flexing, and reduce the unintended risk of unintended escalation that would lead to a real war. And that I think is the task of today. And I'll stop with that. I'm very, very eager to hear what you folks think about what I said. I welcome disagreement as much as anything else, and also thoughts about where this might lead. So I'll finish there.
Thank you very much, Professor Klare. Paul Shannon from the American Friends Service Committee had a short set of announcements, I think, before we go into the question and answer period.
Just wanted to make sure everybody knew about this national conference on the U.S.-Saudi relationship that Coach Inc. has organized March 5th and 6th down in Washington, D.C. because of the tremendous influence that that alliance between us and Saudi Arabia is having on the devastation of what's happening in Syria and the rest of the Middle East. There's also a lot of other very good literature on the field that hopefully we can look at.
And Joseph had one more announcement.
Just make one other announcement while we're here. Just to say that there's an exhibit at the Cambridge Central Square Library now, a series of photographs and paintings given to us by the organization that promise survivors of there's a series of talks. Next week, Lord Wilson and Hillary Shute, and then later, Elaine Sperry will be speaking. There's a flyer about it here, so things that are happening. Also, just to say that there's a different kind of level of feeling to this. From April 5th to April 18th, there's the International Global Days Against Military Spending. And we do stuff here locally, and we're working on this as a whole here, which is on the steering committee. We're organizing this national and international. One way to come in and kind of the frame that Alan, the Bible gave us here, provides this kind of frame that we're talking about the world.
And before we go to the question and answer period, I'd like to remind students in the audience one more time that in case you have to go before the end of the question and answer period, we have the sign-up sheet here in front if you want to sign up with your email address so you can stay up to date on future events. Great. Well, I think we can go into the discussion.
I promised Joe that to have the first crack at me.
Well, I don't want to do crack, just only to say that I work very closely with the Japanese peace movement. And just to appreciate the sort of wild cards out there, the Japanese government and their prime minister is actually the grandson of Class A war criminal, who is doing his best to turn the clock back to the pre-war period, and moving very hard and quickly to further remilitarize Japan, change the Constitution. And just to say that the vision of the Constitution that they have is shifting. It's absolutely shifting. And they were the ones who provoked the crisis for China over the same time through value violence in that period. So be aware of that. The question I have is thinking in terms of how we go forward, and I very much agree with your analysis. I wonder if you see the frame of common security. I think we need to have a positive alternative vision to move people toward. And we need a framework that gives people idea that it could be better and an alternative to this. Now, I wonder if the concept of common security that's developed at the end of the Cold War has ended is something you think might be useful.
Just say a word about that. So, what you mean by that?
Well, my understanding, growing out of the Helmet Commission, was the idea that, okay, you've got these contending powers and forces. That in the process of the military buildups and testing, you're actually inciting fear on the other side, which leads them to increase their military and use firewall. My understanding of the diplomacy that took place then that led to the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement is that in those negotiations, each side named their fear. Each side then attempted to negotiate in a way that reduced that fear, in a way that didn't ultimately weaken them. And you move toward a common security arrangement. You recognize that our side is not going to feel secure if your side feels insecure. It's a basis for hard-headed negotiations, not for easy.
Yes, you're bringing that back to me. Joe, I appreciate your thought that we have to find, a positive framework. I don't think that'll work because this is not being driven by fear of mutual annihilation. This is being driven by a competitive struggle for power and influence by countries that feel that the world is more ripe for exploitation and predation. And what the Republicans are saying is we should reintroduce fear into the equation, which I don't find that a very comforting idea. So how do you deal with this new world? I think finding as I say, the victims of this is not Russia or China or the United States. It's the people of the chessboard countries, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Afghanistan, that are being treated as people to be slaughtered in the name of this competition, and somehow it's a humanitarian impulse to save the innocent that maybe has to be given more highlight. I think what's happening in Syria is just criminal, and words escaping. All right, I'll take other questions. 1, 2, 3, and then I'll get everybody else. 1, 2, 3, okay, and then I'll get others. Yeah, go, please.
I wanted to ask you what you thought the existence of, what part of the existence of military bases plays in this. That is, I think I'm right in saying that the United States has about 800 military bases. I think that's the figure that the region officer. And what is the number that China has, and what is the number that Russia has? And are those military bases irrelevant to this kind of...
No.
Or are they...
Yes, the bases matter. It's the positioning of bases and the positioning of bases and the role that they play in this competition that matters. So the U.S. has lots of bases in Asia, but when the U.S. has acquired new bases in the Pacific, one in Australia, and now they're going back to Subic Bay in the Philippines, and I remember very well because there were so many activists back then who were opposed to that was the biggest American base in the world, Subic Bay. The Filipino population rose up against it. Now we're going back to Subic Bay. Those are signals of intent aimed at China. They're statements to China, we're going to push back against you. So they have this symbolic, like I say, we're going to shove it to you, a little bit. Russia is building up its bases in Syria, and they're clearly creating. They have 2 bases in Syria, and they're expanding them. And the implied threat here is that if there is some kind of effort to create a no-fly zone or something like that to protect the civilians, Russia is going to sabotage that. It's successfully sabotaged that effort, whether you think that's a good idea or not. China is in the process of acquiring its first base in Africa, and this strikes me as it's not a big military base, they're not militarily significant, they're geopolitically significant. So bases matter.
But I guess my question is, in terms of trying to wind this thing down, since we have numerically so many more bases than the others that have 2 or 1, they'll count the numbers. Isn't it the case that one solution is to pull back on our military bases, or is that just a hopeless...
No, I think building down is a good idea, but as I said in my remarks, not building bases that are seen as provocative acts in themselves, that has to stop. You're next, and then this, and then behind, 1, 2, and then over here, and then I'll get everybody.
First off, thank you very much for your talk. My name is Klare, and I'm an active candidate at the Texas Global Institute. From your perspective, I would be curious to know whether, and if so, how ideology is about geopolitical.
That's a very interesting question. To what degree does ideology play a role in this geopolitical competition? Well, in China, I don't know how much you would call it an ideology, but there is certainly a belief that China's time has come, that China is entitled to plant its... That's not the word. That China's time has come to be treated as one of the great powers of the world, that it's entitled to be treated in a new fashion as a great power, and that it is a great power, not just on Chinese territory, but to extend its influence beyond its territory. So whether that's a greater China or a great China, I don't know if you call that an ideology, but it is certainly something that is widely shared, not just among the leadership, but among the Chinese. That's what people told me anyway. So the sense of China's destiny to play, that they're the new superpower of the future. And that I think has a real consequences.
One second, there's a sign-up sheet going around, and the question is to make sure it keeps getting.
I think Russia has a kind of ideology that we are a great power, that has been a great power throughout history, that we were denied our rightful place in the world's hierarchy of nations by the vindictive Americans after the end of the Cold War. And we've been mistreated, and therefore we're going to restore our rightful place. This is Putinism. I think that's kind of ideological, but it's not ideological in the sense it rests on communism or socialism or anything like that. That's the best I think I could do. Yes, please. Right. That was George Bush. Well, thank you for reminding me of that military-to-military cooperation. My sense is that military professionals in the U.S. military think that that's important and a good idea, and I think they're right. So I'll add that to my list of considerations. So thank you for that. I know that the last time, or one of the times, the Secretary of Defense was in Beijing, met with his counterpart to talk about this. His counterpart, whose name I can't remember, said, this is all well and good, but those islands are ours, and we'll use any means necessary, including military force, to take them over. So I don't know how effective they are, because these are political decisions, and all of these actions are political gambits. And as I say, we're in a period of testing, and we now have a presidential election where this is a main theme, where the Republicans are trying to outdo each other in how tough they're going to be in response to these gambits. So it's at the political level that I worry, much less than the military. But thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point. You're next.
My question is quite different. I know that in the past you did on oil and
Yes.
So I haven't heard very much except for violence and research specifically. And I wanted to know what type of violence research.
Yes, I have the same concern myself, because I'm so interested in the resource dimension of things. And, something has changed in the world. When I wrote my book, Blood and Oil, I pictured a world, as did most other analysts at the time, that by now we would be running out of oil. And that's not what's happened. Instead, we're sinking in oil, or drowning in oil. There's too much oil in the world. And the consequences of that are momentous. So one claim in the Russian media is that the U.S. and the Saudis, this alliance that we heard about, the U.S. and the Saudis are conspiring to lower the oil price to drive Russia into bankruptcy. Thomas Friedman said that in the New York Times too. So now there's the possibility that we're using overabundance as a weapon rather than fighting over scarcity. I'm not sure what else to say. Syria is not important for resources. It is important in a World War I-ish kind of way in location. Location. It is the center, it borders Turkey, it borders Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, all these countries, and its pipelines would go through it. The Iraqis and the Iranians want to go pipelines through, so whoever controls Syria in the end will be in a geopolitically important area, but it itself doesn't have a lot of resources. Central Asia has a lot of resources, and there's an intense competition going on between Russia and China and Turkey and India for control of the natural gas and oil of Central Asia. Mongolia's intense competition between Russia and China. As I say, they're not always collaborating. So, and Mongolia, they both want to control Mongolia. This woman I recognized before, then Duncan, and then I'll get you, and then I'll.
Related question, reading about a lead boat today.
Yes.
And it is confusing, and what could possibly be in that plan where when the U.S. has issues in terms of its alliance with Turkey, and they're being played out in the battle in Moscow between the rebel forces and government forces, which are backed by Russia. But what could possibly resolve that?
Well, here's what's happening. Yeah, here, what is happening is that Russia and Assad and ISIS are together crushing the independent resistance, and it looks like they're succeeding. The United States is doing nothing, and nobody else is doing anything. So we're going to see more tens of thousands of people killed and more millions of people fleeing Syria. I don't know what else to tell you. It's a nightmare. And we're watching this in front of our eyes, and nobody's doing anything about it. Now, do I have an answer? No, I don't. It's been destroyed. The diplomatic avenue is down the tubes because the Russians have stepped in, and the what's left of the opposition won't negotiate until the bombing stops, and the Russians say, "Fuck you." I don't know what else to add about this. And Turkey is our ally in some instances, but the Turks care more about killing Kurds than they care about killing ISIS. So they don't want to cooperate with us in Syria because the U.S. is cooperating with the Kurds in Syria against ISIS, and the Turks want to sabotage that. I certainly agree with you that our priority should be what the U.S. government does because we have influence over that. But I think historically the United States has been the most aggressive. But under President Obama, the United States has not been the most aggressive. Other countries are being more aggressive right now. So I can't agree with that part of what you're saying. I think that because of the disastrous policies of George Bush, which was very aggressive in the Middle East, weakening the U.S. military, undermining the U.S. military in the process, the U.S. military is demoralized and weakened, and there's a reluctance to use force on the part of the United States, and this has emboldened Russia and China to try to push back and to test the United States. And I don't agree with you about Ukraine. That doesn't mean I think the U.S. is guiltless. What Russia's done in eastern Ukraine and Crimea is not excusable on the grounds of what the U.S. did. That's just my view. But honest disagreement on this is certainly valuable. And then I'll come over here. 1, 2, 3.
Well,
1, 2, 3. Then we'll see if people want to stay more.
just for everyone's information, since you started speaking, Kerry and Lavrov have announced a ceasefire in Syria.
Oh, thank goodness.
Exactly 1 week. The humanitarian aid for this is who knows if it will hold.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thank you.
But what I really wanted to talk about is that you said that the U.S. is exhausted by 2 wars, but isn't it a little bit more than that? The U.S. has been, since World War II, kind of the hegemon, right?
Yes.
Occupying so many
Yes,
countries.
yes.
That's why, Duncan says we're in Ukraine, we're in East Asia, wherever.
We're not in Ukraine.
Yep.
We don't have forces in the Ukraine. Russia has forces. We don't have forces
But
in
we have
Ukraine.
dominant influence over Ukraine. I mean,
That's not
I'm
true. That's
only
just not
talking-
accurate.
I'm not only
Yeah.
talking military. I'm saying that we have seen in our business to kind of settle the whole world, and that includes military forces. So yes, China and Russia are pushing back, but they're pushing back regionally. They're not yet contending for the kind of influence the U.S. has. So I guess my real question is, isn't there a long-term decline of U.S. power that we need to move towards a multi-power-centric world as opposed to a single hegemony world? Isn't that the...
Okay. All right. Now, in my comments, I said very clearly that the U.S. remain the most powerful country, and it's the only one that has a global presence. I said that very clearly. I also think that it is, as you say, a hegemon in decline. But I don't think the United States was ever supremely dominant everywhere. There was always centers of opposition. And it's so important to remember that, because our leaders seem to think it's hubris we have to worry about. The arrogance, the belief that we can send our forces and prevail. That's the curse of. So let me finish. Yes, what's dangerous, this is not about right or wrong. What's dangerous, history tells us, is moments like this when you have a declining hegemon and you have other powers seeking to push back and test that, and the declining hegemon is reluctant to abandon its historic dominance. That's when you have the risk of multiple wars arising. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to say one is the cause of it. It's the situation we're in that makes this so dangerous.
Right. So, the U.S. 2 centuries ago, the U.S. established the Monroe Doctrine, which establishes a sphere of influence, which we still maintain. Now we complain that China's trying to gain control over the South China Sea. It's like there's no comparison. So
it doesn't matter. So what?
I don't disagree with your analysis that the threat of fascism is very real. But for us as Americans to try to defend what our nation is trying to do doesn't make sense.
That's not what this is. That's not what this is about, and that's not what the young people who are going to be around in the future are going to have to deal with the fact that China is a rising power, is testing us, and is pushing back, and that American leaders are going to have to figure out how to accommodate to this reality. And Russia is pushing back, and we have to accommodate to that reality in a non-provocative way. That's all I'm saying. Otherwise, we're doomed. Arslan, and then I'll come over here.
I agree.
You should say you're also from Tufts. That's your school.
Second year graduate student, I'm also from the college. We talked a little bit about the concept of accidental nuclear or accidental nuclear attack. What is more concerning to me is a non-state actor like ISIS getting their hands on nuclear.
Yes, that's right.
Because I think rational states, it's more likely that accidents can happen than a deliberate attack. The consequences of that would be devastating, and rational states can know that. But if you're somebody who thinks if you blow yourself up, you're going to heaven, it becomes very difficult to grasp an idea of what's in the mentality of people. What do you think about how dangerous do you think it is? Or what do you think about the prospect of states like ISIS or non-state actors like ISIS getting their hands on nuclear?
I don't worry about ISIS. I do worry about the Taliban, the Pakistan Taliban, because there you have a nuclear-armed country, Pakistan. You have people in the military who are sympathetic to the Taliban. You have an unstable political situation in Pakistan. You have the potential of state collapse. I think there's real possibility of that because of climate change, among others, and economic collapse. And there I could see elements of the military collaborating with Taliban. And that worries. Yeah. I recognize this gentleman back there. Please, go ahead. The what? Sunni-Shia divide. Wow, what a question. I suspect some of the tough students might have addressed this and have a better answer than me. That's a very good question and a tough question, and I'm not entirely sure I know the answer to it. You're all aware of the Sunni-Shia divide, and Saudi Arabia is supporting Sunni forces in Syria, in Yemen, in other countries. Iran, a Shia state, is supporting Shia forces in Hezbollah and in Syria, Assad. Russia is aligned with the Shia. China's Uyghurs, I believe they're Sunnis, they're moderate Sunnis, and the Sunnis, and there are more Islamic fundamentalism and jihadism taking root in Russia. So, yes, this is an area of possible collaboration. There was some of that after 9/11, and then it sort of dissipated. So I see that. I've seen references to what you're talking about in the media here and there. So it's a very interesting question. There is a resource dimension to this, in that in that Iran has the largest natural gas reserves in the world, and Russia has the second biggest, and there's talk of them collaborating, using Syria as a through point to export. So there's that. So, there is these conspiracy theories about a U.S.-Saudi alliance against that Russia, Syria, Iranian alliance. So I have to think more about it. Do you have some more to say?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously right now the U.S. is power, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states effectively operate as through NATO, kind of enfranchise them to articulate their own foreign policy interests in Yemen, fighting Shia Houthis who are massively backed by Iran and their what do you see? I don't ascribe to the conspiracy theory that the great powers aligning against each other and all that, but how do you see a possible conflagration directly between Saudi Arabia and Iran and its effect on the great powers in Iran? What level of priority do they place on those relationships? And would it be worth a larger conflagration?
Okay, so my first response to this is I don't think that Iran and Saudi Arabia will ever go to war with each other. Why? Because their oil fields would be destroyed, and that's the basis of their economy. So there's it's mutual assured destruction. I don't think Iran and Saudi Arabia are going to go to war with each other. I think they will fight proxy wars, which is the essence of what I was arguing, but not directly. So I don't worry so much about that. I had recognized Paul.
So just in terms of comparison with this period and the period before World War I, in terms of factors that would work against the world going on, the world economy is far more integrated than it was before World War I. And that isolated empires and economy,
No, there was a higher level of integration then than until very recently.
So you don't see, for instance, China holding all.
No, the big belief there was the big belief then there was a famous book. Do you know the title? That war was impossible because of the degree of integration between France, Germany, Britain, and Russia. What was it called? Yeah.
There were a number that came out.
But there was a book that was produced around 1905 or 1910 by an economist who said we're so totally integrated that war is impossible, and many people believe that. So no, because now, like the reason why I think it is similar is that, as distinct from the Cold War, during the Cold War we thought that war was a real option, a real likelihood. I don't think people think that war between the great powers today is something they would choose. Instead, they're engaging in skirmishing, testing, probing, exercises, and it's the unintended risk of unintended escalation that could come out of it. That was happened then. It was very similar to that period in that respect.
So that you don't see the fact that China holds so much American debt?
No. That's not stopping them or us from sending warships in a near collision course in places. No, that's not what's holding us back. Please, the women. Yeah. Yes.
Do you think the United States knew about 9/11 when it happened? Do you think that we have completely supplied as
No and no.
No and no.
No and no. I don't think so. I think the U.S. created ISIS through the militarization of Iraq, the arrest of all of the dismemberment of the Ba'ath Party, the dismemberment of the Iraqi army, which put all of these Sunnis out of work in the military, became very disgruntled and resisted, thrown in Abu Ghraib and were tortured and became radicalized in American prisons. That's the birthplace of ISIS. So they're a product of American intervention in Iraq. They're not American proxies. Let me see who, oh, okay. Abel.
Yes, you were talking about, the younger generations that are very powerful, more powerful. And I wonder, if I look at current popular news and issues that have gone, or labor movement, I think what we should just have done is kind of move away from the idea of countries versus others, kind of move to power community countries, higher demand, common interests, so whether it's sweatshops, right, and so the focus on environmental research, and I think, if you look at focus across countries, you see that now that climate movement started focusing on not climate change as a threat, or situation out of 50 years ago, actually occurring that, again, particularly. So I wonder, I think right now, essentially, I'd like to hear talk about this. One of the reasons why, issues and geopolitical issues might be less on the mind of, young people is that maybe they can bring into the process. Maybe more conversations caring about groups that are happening. I wonder, what do you see that?
Well, as I said, at the level of countries, this is not being expressed so much as the U.S. versus China, the U.S. versus Russia, but it's being played out in other battlefields where it's local groups, local communities that are struggling, and they are being victimized, they are being taken over by the great powers as tools, as pawns, literally as pawns in this larger geopolitical struggle. So it is local people who are the victims of this process, as was the case. What started World War I was the attempt of the great powers to to dominate what was happening in the Balkans, where you had a lot of local different ethnic groups on the ground struggling with one another. Yeah, well, I think that groups like the American Friends Service Committee have been bringing victims from Afghanistan, from the victims of the drone strikes, the people from Syria coming here to talk about their victimhood, their experiences, and I think that's the way you have to do that. But I'll think more about what you said. I think that's a very good point. I'll have to think about that. I'll tell you this, that this kind of geopolitical struggle is the reverse of cooperation on climate change. So we will not solve climate. I'll say it. We will not solve climate change if the geopolitical competition worsens. They're polar opposites of each other, because you must have Russian, Chinese, American, Indian cooperation to solve climate change. And if we're not talking to each other, then we will not solve climate change. So all these other efforts will be moot. That's what you have to tell them. So working with Chinese and Russian counterparts, we have a climate change, but as on demilitarization in order to solve climate change. That's the way to do it. Yeah, I think I'm getting the signal. So Dale, I want to hear from you, please, and then I think maybe we have to finish. Yeah.
And economic collapse is failed social vulnerability or losing control over nuclear weapons. Can you briefly give us a modest survey of other flashpoints of where climate disruption, climate change, because that's the
Yeah, well-
climate disruption context and economic vulnerability context where failed state or unsafe military or what I think is most significant perhaps is the unrest that can spread across, that there's more opportunity to intervene in disruption focus which countries or locations do you think
Africa and Asia and the Middle East.
well, so that's continental. Continental. Can you be specific to other countries where they're more likely than not?
Well, there are a lot of small and weak countries, you know, all over Africa, where this is happening before our eyes. So, are you asking me where will climate catastrophe provoke something bigger?
Yes. And the economic dimension of that as well. Because when you mention Africa, talk about the convergence of these.
Yeah, yeah.
What I was trying to push you through is those particular studies where there's an opportunity for the proxy wars and skirmishes to also take place in those failed settings, those kind of settings.
Well, Syria is an example of that, of course. Afghanistan is a case, I believe. Yemen, for sure. Yemen is running out of water, and there's a lot of drought. Iraq is another place where drought is a serious problem. Something that I worry about is competition between China and India over water, because the main rivers of both China and India originate in the Himalayas. And China has said we may divert all those rivers to China to satisfy our water needs before they go to India. And India said that would be a cause of war.
And with the melting of the ice cap, are you concerned about the exploration that is now underway?
I don't think that's on the same scale, because I could talk at length about that, and I know there are other people who've been trying to catch my attention, and I'm sorry. So go ahead, give me your question. If I've ignored you, I apologize. No, I don't. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. That doesn't sound like a discipline.
Complicated, complex, chaotic world. Now, my humble opinion is that yes, the United States is a tremendous, powerful country, militarily. Now, we have these two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the U.S. compete for the distribution of the world. They created their own sphere influence. They created their own territory. But there was a division between two superpowers. In the armament race, the same race all the Atlantic things that they were competing to among the U.S. and the Soviet Union,
But you have to tell me where the disagreement is, because we have to finish, unfortunately. So tell me where your disagreement is.
Okay. My disagreement is that you are talking only about military power. You are not talking about this is a different world.
Yes.
This is a different world. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States was left without an enemy.
Yes.
But with a tremendous amount of military factors. And no enemy. So they had to use that power somewhere. And I remember an article in the New York Times in 1991, I don't remember the exact date, where 30% there was a map of the next war that the United States will to fight. And apparently, the U.S. is going to do the war. That's one thing.
But we don't have time. So tell me what you want. Tell me where you want me to respond specifically, so we can have a.
I want you to respond to what is the structure of the present world that is absolutely chaotic. This we here in the U.S. there is the tendency to oversimplify the problem, and we say Tunisia divide, Syria. It's a very complicated issue. Absolutely complicated. You can just say Tunisia against here. What is it?
Yeah, I'm being told that we have to exit the room. So let me say. We'll continue. Let me say I agree that that's the essence of what I'm trying to say. It is a complicated world, and that America remains powerful, but now there are other countries that also have power and are contending with us. China has a lot of military-industrial complex too. So does Russia. And they are building up their strength in relation to the United States. And that makes the situation so dangerous. So I agree with some of what you say.